The sun beat down like a hammer on an anvil over the sun-scorched town of Bleeding Gulch, a place so dry and desperate it seemed the earth itself had given up hope. Dust swirled in lazy eddies down the main street, kicked up by the hooves of two tired horses tethered outside the saloon, their ribs visible beneath patchy coats. Inside the mercantile, across the way,
It was
a
my
scene was
fault.
unfolding that would echo through the
All of
territory
it.
for years to come, not with gunfire or glory, but with a single, shattering phrase that cut deeper than any blade. At the center of it all stood Kaya, a young Apache woman, barefoot on the rough plank floor, her wrists bound with coarse rope, her face painted with the red ochre of her people. Though the lines were smudged now from sweat and sorrow, her dark eyes held no fear, only a simmering defiance that burned brighter than the desert heat. Around her, a small crowd had gathered, ranchers in sweat-stained hats, gamblers with restless fingers, a few women clutching shawls to their chests, all watching with the detached curiosity one might give a stray dog about to be put down. On a crude wooden crate, nailed to the floor, a hand-painted sign read, $3 Apache able, obedient, won't run. The words were a lie wrapped in cheap paper. Kaya had already tried to run. Each time, they'd dragged her back by her hair, beaten her until she couldn't stand, then forced her onto this crate like livestock at auction. And now, the bidding had begun. A drunkard offered a silver dollar. A rancher with yellowed teeth countered with two. Then silence fell until a man stepped out of the shadows near the door. He wasn't tall, but he carried himself like a man who'd weathered storms most would break under. His name was Silas Boone, though few in Bleeding Gulch knew it yet. He wore a brown duster patched at the elbows, a faded blue shirt, and a hat pulled low over eyes the color of weathered slate. His boots were scuffed, his hands calloused, but there was no cruelty in his stance, only a weary kind of sorrow. Without a word, he walked to the front, pulled $3 silver from a worn leather pouch, and dropped them onto the counter with a soft chime that silenced the room. "She's paid for," he said, his voice rough but clear, like stones rolling in a dry creek bed. The shopkeeper, a wiry man named Harker with greasy hair and a permanent sneer, blinked. $3, that's the price. Yeah, but she's not tame, mister. She cut your throat in your sleep. Silas didn't look at him. He kept his gaze fixed on Kaya. "I'll take my chances." He reached for the rope around her wrists, but she flinched back, eyes flashing with warning. "Easy," he murmured. "I'm not here to hurt you." And then, in a voice so low only she could hear, he added, "I'd rather die than own a soul." But before he could loosen the knot, Kaya lifted her chin, her voice cutting through the thick air like a knife through hide. "I'd rather die," she said, the words not shouted but spoken with such quiet, absolute conviction that the entire room seemed to hold its breath. "Then go with you." Silas froze, not from offense, from recognition. He'd heard that tone before, in another life, from another captive. His younger sister, sold off by their own father during the famine of '67. He'd been 12. She'd been 10. He'd never seen her again. And now, decades later, here was another woman staring into the abyss of ownership and choosing fire over chains. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Harker snorted. "Told you she's trouble. Give me the money back, and I'll sell her to the mine boss. He likes feisty." But Silas didn't move toward the counter. He stepped back, just enough to give Kaya space, and did something no one expected. He knelt, not in submission, but in respect. "Then don't go with me," he said, loud enough for all to hear. "Walk out that door. Right now. You're free." Murmurs rippled through the onlookers. "Free? He paid for her." Someone protested. $3 ain't nothing," cried another, but Silas ignored them. His eyes never left Kaya's. "The money was to end the auction," he explained calmly. "Not to buy you. You belong to no one, not Harker, not me, not the U.S. Army. You belong to the wind and the mountains and your own spirit." Kaya stared at him, suspicion warring with something deeper, hope perhaps, or disbelief. No white man had ever offered her freedom without strings. She glanced at the door. It stood open, sunlight streaming through like a promise. But outside waited more than freedom, waited danger. Bleeding Gulch was a town that didn't take kindly to runaway Apaches. Already, two men near the poker table were whispering, their eyes narrowing. If she stepped out alone, they'd hunt her like a wolf. She knew it, and Silas knew she knew it. Slowly, she lowered her gaze. The silence stretched, taut as a boat. Then, with a single, sharp nod, she stepped off the crate and stood beside him. Not behind him, not in front, beside. A statement, an alliance. Not ownership, partnership. Harker sputtered. "You can't just..." But Silas was already moving, placing himself between Kaya and the crowd, his hand resting lightly on the butt of his revolver, not drawing it, just reminding them it was there. "The transaction's done," he said evenly. "She's under my protection now. Anyone with a problem can take it up with me." Outside, no one moved. The threat hung in the air, sharper than any drawn weapon. Silas offered his canteen to Kaya. She hesitated, then took it, drinking deeply, her eyes never leaving the room. When she handed it back, her voice was low, but firm. "My horse, they took him." "I'll get him," Silas said, and he did, marching into the livery. staring down the foreman until the man, sweating and pale, let out a paid horse with a white blaze and a defiant gleam in its eye. Kaya's face softened, just slightly as she ran a hand down the mare's neck. "Sizig," she whispered the Apache word for lightning. They left Bleeding Gulch as the sun began its descent, casting long shadows that seemed to chase them like ghosts. Silas walked beside his own horse, leading Sizig, giving Kaya space, speaking only when necessary. He didn't ask her story, didn't demand her trust. He simply was a quiet presence in a world that had taught her all men were predators. Night fell fast in the desert, and they made camp in a dry arroyo where a trickle of water still clung to the rocks. Silas built a small, smokeless fire, roasted jerky over the flames, and laid out his bedroll a respectful distance away. Kaya sat near the fire, arms wrapped around her knees, watching him. "Why?" she finally asked, the word sharp as flint. "Why pay $3 for nothing?" Silas poked the fire with a stick, his face half in shadow. "Because someone once paid $2 for my sister," he said quietly, "and I couldn't stop them. I've carried that failure like a stone in my chest for 20 years. Today, I just didn't want another soul to carry that weight." Kaya studied him, the lines around his eyes, the scar along his jaw, the way his shoulders sagged when he thought no one was looking. She saw not a savior, but a man trying to outrun his own ghosts. And in that moment, something shifted. Not trust, not yet, but the first crack in the wall she'd built around her heart. Days turned into weeks as they journeyed east, toward the Chiricahua Mountains, Kaya's ancestral home, though much of it now lay within reservation boundaries or military patrols. Silas never questioned her directions. He followed her lead through canyons and washes, learned to read the signs. She pointed out the bent branch, the disturbed sand, the hawk circling too low. In return, he taught her how to load his Winchester quickly, how to read the stars for direction, how to set a snare that wouldn't hurt the animal more than necessary. They spoke little, but their silence grew comfortable, woven with shared meals and watchful glances. One evening, as they bathed Sizig in a cool stream, Kaya finally told him her story. Her village had been attacked by Comancheros men who sold Apache captives to mines and brothels. Her father died defending the entrance. Her mother and younger brother were taken. She'd escaped during the chaos, riding bareback for 3 days before being caught near a settler's ranch. She'd been passed from hand to hand, trader, sheriff, merchant, each time branded as property. "They call us savages," she said, water dripping from her braids, "but it is they who cage what they do not understand." Silas listened without judgment. "I've seen good men do evil things," he replied, "and evil men pretend to be good. The badge, the uniform, the dollar, they don't make a man. His choices do. But the past has long arms." One morning, they found fresh tracks circling their camp boots, not moccasins. Harker had put a bounty on them, $50 for the Apache woman, dead or alive. $24, the cowboy who stole her. Worse, U.S. cavalry patrols had been alerted, a white man aiding a fugitive Apache. Now they were hunted by law and outlaw alike. Silas knew they couldn't outrun forever. They needed sanctuary. Kaya led him to a hidden canyon, known only to her people, a place called Whispering Rocks, where the wind through the stone spires sounded like voices from the spirit world. There, they found an old trapper's cabin, half collapsed but defensible. They spent days reinforcing the walls, stockpiling water, setting traps along the approaches. And then, one dusk, the riders came. Not Harker's thugs, a lieutenant from Fort Bowie, flanked by 6 bluecoats, their rifles gleaming in the fading light. "Boone," the lieutenant called, his voice crisp with authority. "You're harboring a federal fugitive. Surrender the woman, and you'll face only a fine." Silas stood in the cabin doorway, Winchester in hand. "She's not a fugitive. She's a free woman." "Free," the lieutenant laughed. "She's Apache. Under the Indian Appropriations Act, all unallotted natives are wards of the state. She belongs to the reservation or the grave." Kaya stepped out from behind Silas, her face painted fresh with red ochre and white clay, a warrior's mark. "I belong to the earth," she said, voice ringing with ancestral pride, "not to your laws." The lieutenant's hand twitched toward his sidearm. "Last chance." Silas raised his rifle slightly. "This ends in blood if you push it." Tension crackled like dry grass and fire. Then, from the ridge above, a new voice, old, raspy, but strong, "You boys best turn around." All heads snapped up. There, silhouetted against the sunset, stood an elderly Apache man in a faded blanket, holding a longbow. Behind him, 5 more warriors appeared, silent as shadows. Arrows knocked. It was Kaya's uncle, Nantan, thought dead in the Comanchero raid. He'd tracked her for weeks. "This is our land," Nantan said calmly. "Your laws do not walk here." The lieutenant hesitated. He was outnumbered, outmaneuvered. With a curse, he signaled his men to retreat. As the cavalry vanished into the dust, Kaya ran to her uncle, tears streaming down her face. But she didn't leave Silas's side. That night, around a larger fire, Nantan spoke. "This white man paid for your freedom with his own safety," he told Kaya. "That is a debt of honor, not shame." He turned to Silas. You have no tribe, no home, but you protected one of ours. That makes you kin. In the weeks that followed, Silas found something he hadn't known. He was looking for belonging, not as a savior, not as an owner, but as a brother in arms, a friend, a man judged by his actions alone. Kaya, in turn, learned that not all white men were wolves in human skin. They rebuilt the cabin together, planted a small garden. Silas even began learning Apache phrases, much to Kaya's amusement. One morning, as they watched the sunrise paint the canyon walls gold, Kaya handed him a small beaded pouch. For your medicine, she said. Inside was a smooth river stone and a feather from a red-tailed hawk, symbols of grounding and vision. You saved me, she said softly. Silas shook his head. No, you saved yourself. I just got out of your way. She smiled, then a real smile, rare and radiant. Then walk with me, she said. Not ahead, not behind, beside. And so they did. Through seasons, through storms, through the slow healing of old wounds. The $3 had bought nothing and everything. Not a person, but a choice. Not ownership, but freedom. And in the end, that was worth more than all the silver in the world.